So, welcome to the podcast, Ellen.
Thanks for having me.
So, can you share your background and how you got into your line of work?
Yeah, so it's been a culmination of my own health journey, in my early 20s, just trying to figure out what I was going through, the pain I was feeling, really advocating for myself. And at the time, I was a hairstylist. I had gone to nursing school, hated it, switched it up at 19,
Hmm.
decided become a hairstylist, and was working as a hairstylist
You have
in
great
Hawaii,
hair,
actually,
by the way.
and was just thanks. It did give me some skills. Hair and makeup is one of them, but I think, yeah, it's my only girly quality. I always joke like I was such a tomboy in high school that then I went to beauty school and everyone was like, "What?" But yeah, so I became a hairstylist and was really struggling. I mean, it's definitely a job that you don't eat. You're
Hmm.
working all the time, you don't eat. I was in my 20s, and I had already, become vegan at that point, and thought I was doing all the healthy things and was really experiencing a lot of health issues that I couldn't get help with. And it turned out it was my gallbladder, and it kind of sent me down this path of, okay, well, if I'm so healthy and I'm vegan and I'm seeing then issues with my cycle and overall health, like, what's the key here? So I am an Enneagram 8, if anybody's into that, and I'm a Virgo. So I'm definitely a researcher by nature. And so I just put a lot of my extra time and energy into that, and really started focusing on my hormone health and got off birth control. I share the story of, like, there was this woman that owned the health food store, like, was like across from the salon I worked at. And I went in there one day and was talking to her about, like, like getting off birth control, but like, what was I going to do? I knew it was terrible for me, but I just like really didn't know what I could do outside of birth control. And she tells me about cycle like tracking. And I
Hmm.
I I literally thought she was crazy, because I was like, there's no way that this is real, that we can like, track our cycles and know when we ovulate and like avoid or try to get pregnant easier with this. And I went back to the salon and like jokingly told everybody about this, and everyone was like, no way, like there's
Hmm.
no way that's real. So that was kind of my intro into cycle tracking. I started tracking my cycle, got off birth control, really saw a lot of improvements in my health, and I decided to make a career shift. I had been a stylist for 7 years and wasn't super fulfilled with it, and spent so many years talking to women in my chair about health and about pregnancy and birth and becoming a mom. And it was something I was always interested in. I'd always wanted to be a mom, but the stories that women were sharing were terrifying.
Hmm.
So, long story short, I became a doula and a childbirth educator, mostly out of my own, research and kind of wanting to figure out alternatives for that next stage of my life. And became a doula, started working with women. The whole empowerment of women became something I was pretty enthralled in. Spent so much time as a doula and childbirth educator, really empowering and educating women. And then it was my turn to get pregnant. I had met my husband in Hawaii. We got married, started trying to get pregnant. And I was the healthiest I've ever been. Was my thinnest, was by all accounts my healthiest. And we got pregnant super easy because I tracked my cycle. I knew when I ovulated.
Hmm.
I had been diagnosed in the past with PCOS, but had that under control through nutrition and lifestyle. And yeah, we got pregnant super easy. And I ended up miscarrying at 11 weeks. And so
Oh my
that
God.
really sent me
Sorry.
down another rabbit hole.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of a lag, but
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, there's a little bit of a lag. And it isn't the best connection, but we're gonna have to. Hopefully, it'll
rolling with
work.
it. Yes. So the miscarriage at 11 weeks, I mean, I think it shakes anyone, but for someone who considered themselves so healthy,
Yeah.
I had done all the things. I had spent years researching, and I was a doula, right? And I was in this birth world, and I was supposed to be good at this.
Yeah.
And so when I had the miscarriage, and it was, again, at 11 weeks, I went in for my ultrasound and there was no heartbeat. And, it was all a lot of trauma. So I started really connecting with women that had been through the same experience. Oddly, I think most of our experiences when you have a miscarriage, like you didn't know anybody that did. And yet I was in this birth world and I felt like I should have known more, or, and I just didn't have a community around it. And so luckily my chiropractor, who's also a midwife, had recommended to me to get my MTHFR gene marker test done to see if that could have been part of what had happened in an early miscarriage, because she knew like I had PCOS. She knew just kind of like the back end of my health. And luckily she had pointed me in that direction. And then it sent me down the rabbit hole of epigenetics and really being able to take some control over the situation by researching and understanding that there were things that I could kind of take control over, right? I could look at my health in a different way than I had, viewed it before, and pay attention to my genetics and pay attention to the MTHFR gene, and really kind of optimize my health around that, and really focus on hormonal balance where I had before, but not with this like MTHFR and the detoxing and all of that. So we spent a year preparing and getting my body just in the right place hormonally, doing all the things that I teach now, and got pregnant a year later with my daughter Willow. She's 2, and I had a great pregnancy. I loved being pregnant. I had a home birth with her, and that kind of played my doula role there. And it's postpartum, obviously, all of those things kind of play into it, but into our story. But really optimizing my health through that journey of the loss of becoming pregnant, having this healthy pregnancy, and then that transition postpartum of like, oh, I have to rebalance my hormones again, and like health isn't this destination; it's this continual evolution, especially as a woman. And so just kind of seeing what that felt like postpartum, and being kind of in the trenches of it again, and really recognizing that at that point, I really wanted my focus in nutrition to be hormone health, optimizing our health as women, and that kind of again sent me down this rabbit hole of our infradian rhythm, which is, we know men, well, we all function off of their circadian rhythm, but women have their unique rhythm. And so the infradian rhythm was just really cool to me, that we had all this science and information around men's health, but we just didn't in women's health. And so we were always considered just little men, which is funny that we birth babies, but we're little men. And so, I just started kind of really honing in on what I could do at that point to really be present in my body. I had this empowering birth, and I really wanted to stay connected to my body. And so starting to pay attention to that cycle. I was already cycle tracking, for years at this point. So I knew when I ovulated, I knew what my cycle was. And so I just started paying attention to those 4 phases in your cycle that every woman in their menstruating years has. And really started optimizing that, which it's called cycle syncing. And it's just a really beautiful part of the work that I do with women now.
I love cycle syncing, and I love the infradian rhythm. I love syncing with the moon. I love all of that. It's always fascinated me. So for the listeners, can you explain to them what cycle syncing is?
Yeah. So cycle syncing is essentially optimizing your body throughout your cycle. So like you mentioned, that there's the moon phases go along with that. We have essentially, seasons to our body as well. So the 4 phases that I mentioned are your menstrual phase, which is winter. Think new moon, right? We're shedding our lining. We're really, it's a time to release. It's a time to rest. It's a time to, when you think about that season of winter, you're eating soups and bone broths and just really hearty winter foods, things that you're attracted to in the winter naturally. And then you move into your follicular phase, which is the springtime. That's your waxing moon. And you're really high energy. You're kind of getting ready to ovulate. So you're usually high energy, estrogen dominance. Estrogen plays a role in that, your hormone at that point. And so that estrogen dominance really gets you working at like a high energy pace. So it's a good time to kind of attack those things that you really need to get done with energy. So, be that for work or a mom life situation, whatever it is. And then you move into your ovulatory phase, which is summer, your full moon, which is pretty cool. Your full moon, I think that's super powerful, that's our ovulation. And then that's when you're most confident. Your estrogen and your testosterone are, really at play here. And so most people feel really sexually attractive, obviously, at this point, are really attracted to their partner. And so obviously this is just facilitating our body to get pregnant, which is always its goal, is to ovulate. And so then we move into the luteal phase, which is fall. And at this point, that's the waning moon. And so that's where our real internal wisdom comes in. And that's when you're intuitive, your testosterone's the highest, because that's going to keep your pregnancy going if everything had worked out right and you got pregnant at ovulation. And so that progesterone stays high until you menstruate again and go through that whole cycle over again. And so the point of cycle syncing is to know those phases and be able to use that internal wisdom that I think too often we're told isn't important. Like,
right.
Don't worry about it. Like, here's the new age things, like don't pay attention to it, is cool. Let us tell you what to do with your body. But when we can be internal, know these phases of our body, not only to track our ovulation, but to just really optimize how we're eating. So eating for those phases based on those, those seasons, and for the hormones that are at play at that point, we can be internal, we can be, essentially biohacking for our female bodies, which is super powerful. And really wise.
Yeah, it is amazing. So how do you implement cycle syncing?
So cycle syncing, again, you essentially can, I think, in my type A personality, it's important to kind of look at the month, look at where you're at in the month, know what phase you're in. You're going to plan your food around that. So I walk my clients through, again, like I talked about menstrual phase, that, winter foods, bone broths, right, and the sweet potatoes and that kind of stuff. That's what your body needs energetically, nutritionally, micronutrient wise, like that's what your body needs. And so if you're in that phase, you're going to purchase those types of foods and meal plan around those types of foods. You're also not going to take on a podcast or a, interview or a big work event, somewhere that you need to be social. You're going to be able to say to yourself, oh, no wonder I don't feel productive right now. I'm going to take a step back, honor my body, and not expect myself to be this top level productive person when that's not what my body wants to do. And instead, I'm going to release things that need to be released emotionally or physically even, and being kind of in that moment to rest and take that time, especially as women, moms. I think it's really hard to say, okay, I'm going to, again, in those other seasons, that's the same type of way you're going to see it. You're going to back up and say, okay, like this is the time I'm going to plan this podcast to be on, or this is the time I'm going to take that big meeting with a client, or I'm going to, be more creative with the play with my kids. And so you can really utilize that wisdom and what kind of blueprint our body's given us to be essentially in, your power.
But also, I mean, I've heard of like things like seed cycling and to help the cycle regulate as well for people who don't have a regular cycle.
Yeah. So seed cycling is actually one of the first things I kind of got into. And I actually just put up on my link for Instagram, just a free ebook on seed cycling. So seed cycling is the idea you're going with this cycle and you're using the seeds that are estrogen or progesterone seeds, and you eat them based on your cycle. So it's really cool because, again, like you said, when you're eating this way, when you're eating the foods that are based on the phase of your cycle, you're just helping your body be more in tune to those hormones and to, again, those nutrients that your body needs. So you're able to, balance your hormones. And even women who I've worked with, that don't have a period, they don't have a bleed, they're not seeing that blood, they can start seed cycling and actually get their bleed from just syncing up with the moon. So you start with the new moon and start the seeds based on the new moon, even if you don't have a bleed.
Right. Got it.
Really cool. Okay.
So in general, how do you work on helping women balance their hormones?
Yeah, so I've set up a 12-week program, and we start with, what I'm talking about here about the cycle syncing and body literacy. So I help women understand their cycle, what's normal, what's healthy, demystifying some things that we're told all the time, that PMS is normal and painful periods are normal and things like that. So we get into what a healthy cycle is, and then we talk about cycle syncing. So this idea of utilizing your cycle to balance your hormones, but just to be more aligned with your body and have an ease to your life. And we talk about, eating around that and lifestyle habits. And then we get into, food for blood sugar balance, so eating for that, and cutting out inflammation causing foods. I always like to say, like, not all of those foods cause inflammation for everyone, but they are important to cut out and reevaluate. And then also just essentially showing people what those foods can be and how they can interact with your body. And a lot of people say, like, oh, I don't have an issue with that food, until they cut it out. And then they realize that some of their, digestive were part of that. So I do teach you how to reintroduce foods, and also just like the quality of those things. Commonly dairy is one, but raw dairy or goat dairy.
Do you work with like a elimination diet? Yeah,
so I don't call it an elimination diet necessarily. Mm-hmm. We, like I said, focus on, making a blood sugar balanced meal. So how are you incorporating fats, protein, and fiber balanced? How are you eating, often enough to keep that blood sugar balanced? And then we talk about those foods that cause inflammation, like gluten and dairy and, seed oils and those vegetable oils, and just kind of addressing those main components that cause inflammation, cutting those out, and essentially eating, cycle syncing in a, I guess, kind of following that paleo lifestyle, in the sense of, we're not consuming a ton of sugar, definitely not processed sugar. You're cutting out those other inflammation causing foods and really focusing on really heavy veggies, fruit, and, clean protein, and, minimal dairy where it's appropriate for people. Then we're bringing in that seed cycling, and, again, they're going to reintroduce those foods, but in a slow fashion.
Right. So, I mean, one thing I know just with working with people is everybody has such a different body type that reacts differently to foods. So how do you address that with people to try to get them to understand what is good for their body?
Yeah. So when we're talking about kind of that foundation around, cycle syncing. So if we know, again, that we're in our menstrual phase, we all need those warming foods. Now, that might look different for you and me. Like, I might be able to tolerate, regular white potatoes, but like you can only do sweet potatoes, for instance. Or, you have an issue with histamine, and so you can't do bone broth, but like I can chug bone broth all day, right? So we have to be mindful, but a lot of women that I work with, like, this is kind of their first step into really changing their diet at all, as far as not just dieting, right? Like, this is not a diet. This is just a way of introducing foods in alignment with our bodies. And then we can continue to do the research to kind of see what affects our body differently. So if you haven't had bone broth and all of a sudden, like, you're chugging bone broth, and every menstrual cycle, we're seeing when, we're doing your chart, when you're fertility awareness, using fertility awareness method, you have a chart that comes from taking your basal cell temperature and tracking your cervical fluid. And so we're looking at that. And if your, cycle has changed, your temperatures are off in your menstrual phase, and we can start paying attention to some of those factors, like foods that would cause a histamine reaction in someone else. So maybe we cut that bone broth out and try it back later. So it's just kind of a process, because everybody's body is so different. It's definitely a process to see what works for everyone. But this is a foundation that generally, based on our bodies as women, works really well.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm with you on cutting out all the inflammatory foods. I mean, because that is pretty much of a generalized thing, because it tends to affect a lot of people adversely.
Right. And we're not taking a shot in the dark necessarily. It is shown that these foods do cause inflammation. And I'll always say that there is no place for, canola oil. Like, no one needs that. Like, your husband doesn't, you don't, like, nobody needs it. So some of those things stick. But that's a generalized one. And again, like, if you're experiencing a ton of digestive issues, once you start introducing things back, like, you're gonna know what really caused that for you. And if you can't make a quality switch, then we know that that's something that you should take out until you can get testing done. I'm a big fan of testing for food sensitivities and allergies too. Sure. But again, that we can lay this foundation of cutting out inflammation, and then you can go and get that testing done,
Right. Yeah, definitely. I mean, it takes a lot of mindfulness too, and our bodies do speak to us. I say, it's spoken to us way before we had this technology, and it does so because that's how nature designed us to know. Even animals will fast from time to time when they know that their bodies need a break, and or they have something off with their digestion. So it is something that innately we do have wisdom for. So I also love the fact that you talk about body awareness. I stress so highly and encourage my patients to chart their cycles, and I've even had some patients chart their cycles and then know exactly when they're about to get their period, because the temperature will just start dropping. And it is really amazing how much it can tell you about your body.
Yeah, it's recognized as our fifth vital sign. So, if you think about it, like, we would never ignore a temperature. If you were, that being one of your vital signs, like, if you had a temperature, you wouldn't just be up walking around and acting as normal. You would take that as a sign that your body needs rest and, to really nourish it. And so we should be doing that as well with our cycle, and being able to be intuitive in that, and seeing it on a graph and seeing it, charted like that. You can pay attention to, like, oh man, last week when I had that wine after dinner, 2 nights in a row, like, my temperature dropped or spiked, and clearly, like, that's not working well for me, or my sleep has been really off, and I'm seeing that in my temperatures as well. Or like, it's cool to see retrospectively, like, what those things are doing to your body, and also just seeing that balance of where your temperatures are supposed to be, lower temperatures in the beginning of your cycle and that follicular phase, and then those temperatures go up with progesterone being higher in your second half. So we can really see that as, like, is this a healthy cycle? So if we're trying to get pregnant, that's one more piece of evidence that we have kind of on our side to make us feel a little bit more at ease as we're making these changes.
Definitely. And then as far as workouts go, that's actually something that I find really important. In Chinese medicine, they talk about losing blood and then losing sweat. We have our vital fluids, and I personally try not to exercise, and I don't encourage too much sweating and too much exertion during the time of your period. I think it's better to allow the body to rest and release naturally. What are your thoughts on that, on exercise and cycle syncing?
Yeah. So if we're following again with that cycle syncing, knowing that winter, I mean, how do we feel about working out in the winter? Like, I don't know anybody who's, unless you've already got a really strong routine going, like, you probably don't it's like the time that we want to rest and watch, Netflix or,
Yeah.
have a bath or whatever, right? It's not our time to be up doing, our spin cycle class and getting on our Peloton. So yeah, it's definitely a time to rest. Movement is always great. Go for a walk with your kids or your dog, or do some, yin yoga. But then, again, going into your follicular phase, that's that high energy. So that's the time to try something new and, really push your body, do more of a HIIT workout. And, kind of same into that ovulatory phase, you're going to have more confidence. You're going to want to try something new. That energy is going to be higher. It might be time to do more of that cardio. And get on that spin bike then. And then, luteal, again, your body that's going into fall, that's your body's winding down, like getting prepped to have that bleed. And so you're kind of going in again to your body. And that's when I say, like, whatever your body is telling you at that point, like, listen to it. If you want to, maybe in the beginning of the week, like, you still want to hop on your bike, do it. But then probably towards the end of the week, like, you're going to be slowing down and get into yoga, do some body weight stuff that's just low reps, body weight, like, move your body, but don't push it. So yeah, it all goes along with that, which is intuitive and really nice to kind of have a guideline, I guess, so that we don't push ourselves.
For sure. I think that that's something that is important to be mindful of, because our bodies do have cycles. So what can you suggest, or are there any tips that you'd like to share with the listeners about how they can become more in tune with their body, and how they can start implementing more awareness into their cycles?
Yeah. So I think just looking up this, cycle syncing technique and just giving your body the grace to move through it without a lot of judgment. So I feel really counterintuitive at first, because I think the number one thing I hear from clients is, oh, well, like, how do I incorporate these foods? Or, like, they get the energy part of it and, like, the workout part of it. That makes a little bit more sense. I think the food part is harder because we're just not used to, one, eating the rainbow, right? Like, so eating a lot of different foods. And we're not used to not eating tacos every Tuesday, right? So we kind of have to unlearn stuff and get back to the basics of, like, okay, what's my protein? What's my veggie? What's my healthy fat? And building meals that way. And so I would just say, give yourself grace, make a really pretty calendar that's like, okay, I know right now I'm in my menstrual phase. So I'm going to start my month here, and I'm going to, there's general, practice for that. So you can just kind of write it out on a calendar, know that, like, during that time, those are the certain foods that you're going to eat, and go grocery shopping based on that. So I have some cool visuals on my Instagram highlights for cycle syncing. So you can just, like, screenshot them based on where you are in your cycle, and you can shop based on that. So foods are on there along with, like, the moon and the seasons. So it's nice to have that visual, but I just recommend creating a plan for yourself. I mean, obviously this is the work that I do with women. So I think if you're wanting to become more in tune with your body, having a community of women to do that with, and also someone to coach you through it versus you going and reading the book, or, trying to hold yourself accountable to some big lifestyle changes like that can be harder on your own. So I always say, like, join a community. But if you're a self-learner, like, there are so many books out there, and Pinterest is an amazing tool as well.
What books do you recommend?
One of my favorite, if you're really looking to, get your period back, and your focus is largely on your period, I would say Nicole Jardim. She's got Fix Your Period. And then Elisa Beatty has In the Flow. In the Flow is just it's super nerdy. It's a lot of information on what we talked about today with the cycle syncing. And it's pretty in depth. She has an app as well, which is pretty cool. And that's a good visual for the cycle syncing.
Awesome. Well, how can people find you?
Yeah. A lot of free resources on Instagram. That's my handle's ellen.r.barnard. And then yourharmonyhive.com. So you can go there, check out my next group program is coming in January, the second week of January, giving you a little bit of time to come into 2021 and then get serious about your goals and your health. So that'll be an awesome group of women just really wanting to lay the foundation for hormonal health and, that foundational health for their bodies and for 2021.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Ellen. And I'm sorry about all of the technical difficulties, but we made it happen.
Yes, always. Moms just have to make it happen.
That's for sure. Well, thank you so much for coming on today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.